Hello YouTube, this is OBIS. Thank you for joining me for another sound design tutorial. In this week's episode, we will be taking a look at how to design a progressive Pluck synth using all styles of EDM and dance music. So let me show you how that sounds. Now, in my past few videos that I've been doing, I've been using UHE's Hive synth, and I figure that most of you probably don't have that. So this time I want to incorporate Ableton's native plugins only to make this sound, and I would use using analog as the main synth for the sound. And I added some additional processing as well after, effects, reverb, little saturator. But, you know, basically the sound itself, here, let me just group this for you and mute this. I'll show you the sound just from analog, how it's going to sound basically. And with the processing, and these are all Ableton effects and plugins. Okay, so you see a little more atmosphere, and I also grouped the analog and made a macro, so basically I can control the cutoff, but I actually should rename that because it's not only cutoff, it's actually opening a little bit release as well, and it's actually controlling both the cutoff filters of analog, so you'll hear how that sounds as I open it. I mapped it to one of my knobs on my MIDI controller. You could do that if you want. As you can see, I'm not moving the mouse, or you could just simply, with the mouse, just move it up and down, and here's how that sounds. Okay, so that's the sound I'm going to be showing you how to make, so let's jump right into it. Let me mute this. I will copy the original MIDI pattern I made over to this blank MIDI track. We will minimize the original. Drums aren't that important right now, so let's just go to our instruments categories, and we will open up a new instance of Ableton's analog. And let's play that and hear how the blank patch will sound. Ooh, that is loud. Sorry about that, guys. Make sure you turn that down. Okay, so that doesn't sound great, but let's start. First thing we want to do, we will leave it as its default. It's a sawtooth, so that's what we want. We'll do some slight detune. Go to our amp and let's adjust our envelope. What we want to do is bring down our sustain and then bring down our decay until we start getting the plucky kind of vibe that we're going for. You don't want it too tight, but well, it depends what style you're going for. For this progression, we want a little bit of a tail, so that's why I left the release. If you wanted it to be, you know, just completely cut off at the end and no tail, you could just cut off the release like that, but that's not what we want. Okay, so right there sounds okay for now. We haven't introduced any filter cutoff yet, so that could be our next step. Yeah, let's just do that. We can leave it at the standard low pass 24 filter, and we will just bring down our frequency just, you know, till we're about hearing it, and we're not getting too much because we're actually gonna bring up the envelope amount for this, the filter envelope, and we can actually define that over here simply by clicking in this category. You see where it says ENV4? Press delete, or if you just bring it down to 0, you're not getting any envelope amount. So now if you bring it all the way up, you're getting full. We don't want full. So let's just adjust that to taste, And right here is the actual envelope shape for our filter envelope cutoff. So we can adjust this. Let's bring down our sustain all the way. And let's adjust our decay until we get it nice and tight and plucky. Bring up our release a little bit. Okay, so we're definitely getting in the ballpark. We can bring up our resonance just a bit. You can always adjust that to taste. We can turn on our noise oscillator. Just to introduce some of the higher register frequencies into our patch. Another thing I like to do is, okay, so make sure you see where it says 2 F2, filter 2. Let's bring this up to 100%. Enable filter 2. And you're also going to want to enable the amp 2 of filter 2. As you can see, the signal runs a little hot. Over here on volume, let's just bring it down, I don't know, -8. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, we're almost there. Let's do like -12. Okay, that's a safe bet. Just brought up my level just a tad. Another thing you could do is go to oscillator 2 and let's bring it up an octave. And let's detune it down a slight bit. What I did is I brought down the noise oscillator a bit because I felt that, it was getting in the way of the tone a little bit. Okay, so that's basically the meat of the sound as far as analog goes, because analog doesn't have built-in effects. We can use some of Ableton's. Right off the bat, we can make this sound a little wider. Oops, undo that. We want to throw in a simple delay. And we want to turn both of these to time. Bring the first parameter down to 1 milliseconds. And we'll bring the second one down to, I don't know, around 10 or 10 to 15. 10 is fine. And we want to make sure the dry wet is all the way up. And at this point, we can bring up the volume of our main track. Initially, I brought it down because it was pretty loud with the initial patch, but now we can start bringing it up. And I'll show you how it sounds without the simple delay to show you the difference. It's a little bit wider. And if you have headphones, you could hear the difference there. It's subtle, but it's all those little differences that add up to give you a more depth to your sound. You could throw in some phaser. And what I like to do with this is bring the rate down and I want to color the sound. So we can keep the dry wet 100% just to find the timbre or the color that I want for the phase, and then I'll bring that down. Okay, so I like that over there. So once I find the point I like in the phaser, I'm just going to bring the dry wet all the way down, and then I'm going to bring it up until I like how that sounds. So I just want it barely there. Another thing you can do is just throw in an EQ. and we want to cut out the lows. So let's just bring it up to right there. Looks good. Just so that you can add like a sub and a bass later throughout your progression, and as well as your kick, and you're not going to have so many competing frequencies in the lows, because this sound really doesn't need it there. So let's just hear how it sounds with the kick in the background, or the drums that I set up, just in context. Okay, so it's sounding pretty good. And keep in mind, we don't even have a sidechain compressor set up at this point. So we can obviously do that. Just go sidechain audio from, in this case, the kick. And we can bring down our threshold until we get a good amount of gain reduction, a good amount of the yellow coming in this meter. So let's hear how that sounds. Okay, so, just a, pretty fast attack. Not all the way, because we want to get a little bit of that pluck coming through, but just enough with a medium gain reduction. And without the drums, let's just show you how that sounds. Another thing you can do at this time is throw on a reverb. Put the low cut, take off the high cut, turn off the spin, turn these high end chorus off, and make sure the quality is on high. It's very important. Bring the size down. You can keep the decay time about where it is. And let's bring down the dry wet, and let's hear how that sounds. Just to add a little presence. So you can obviously tweak those parameters to taste. I just wanted it to add a little depth, kind of like a room environment. Okay, so that's with and without it. Another thing you can do is add a saturator. Just bring up some, introduce some extra harmonics in there. Bring down the dry wet a bit. Let's hear that with the drums. Okay, so that's pretty much the sound, and we're just using all basic Ableton synths. And another thing you'd probably want to do is automate this sound as far as like the cutoff and stuff to open up, as I showed you in my previous example. So what you could do is, what I did is I just grouped analog in that case, but you can actually just group everything in case you wanted to be more expressive and MIDI map some other parameters. So in Ableton, you just hit Control G on PC or Command G on Mac. You group the whole rack. You could rename this if you like. Okay, never mind. I'm not going to save it anyway, so actually, let's save it. We were going to name it OBIS Prog Tutorial Rack And I will include this in the description. And let's hear how that sounds one more time. Okay, now let's go to this little circle symbol right here, which looks like a power, upside down power symbol. That is the macro settings. We can go to macro 1, and basically we can hit map. Now you see how all these mappable parameters turn green. Now for this case, all I want to focus on is the cutoff. So you see frequency on filter 1. We want to hit that. We can right click and go map to macro 1. Now as you can see, that has been mapped. We can also go down here to filter 2, right click it, and we could go map to the same one, macro 1. So now we have both of those parameters mapped to the same knob. So you know, when we increase that one parameter, you'll increase both. And as you can see, these have both popped up in this macro mappings menu. And we can adjust the minimum and maximum parameter values as according to what we're trying to achieve, which we will do this after we assign what we want to map. Another thing we can map if we wanted to make it a little more expressive to the same knob is probably the release of the amp. So let's go to amp 1, the amp envelope, and look for the release setting right here. Right click it, go to map to macro 1. And now we have those three options. Okay, so we can exit our map menu. In this case, if you do have a MIDI controller with knobs or faders or whatever, in this case knobs would probably work better. You could just go to right here where it says MIDI at the top right, and as you can see, everything highlights. And I will click here on macro 1, the knob right there, and I will move the knob that I want to control, and as you can see, it assigns a value right there. I will exit by simply clicking the highlighted MIDI, and we're back to the normal menu. And now when I move my MIDI controller knob, you can see that macro 1 knob also moves accordingly. Now, if you don't have a MIDI controller, that's fine. You can just use your mouse, as I am right here, and it's the same effect. And this is also automatable in Ableton in both session view as well as arrangement view. Okay, so next thing we want to do is hit map, because as you could tell when we start playing the sound, well, let me mute the drums. As you can see, it starts from a very low extreme to a very high extreme, and that's most likely not going to be what you want in most cases. If it is, that's fine. You can just leave it there. In this case, we want to really fine tune the frequency cutoffs so that we kind of, you know, it's not overkill. We can open it up all the way in the automation, or if we're playing it live and it'll still sound good to taste, and we can also close the filter or turn down the knob to the negative direction all the way, and it'll still sound nice and accordingly. So how we achieve that is right here. So for minimum value, maximum value, this is filter 1 frequency. So that is controlling this first macro that we control here. So let's just play with that. Okay, so something around there sounds good for the minimum. Let's go to the second filter frequency. Okay, so that's going to be our minimum. So when we're all the way down on our knob or in our automation lane, we can sound roughly there. And we can obviously keep fine-tuning that, but we're just going to use that for a starting point. Let's go back to filter 1 frequency, and let's adjust the maximum. So let's open up our knob all the way with your mouse or your MIDI control. And for me, that's way too open. Yeah, and as you can see, that annoying tail was because I had the release was set by default to the maximum, so kind of just rang on. So you want to reset that by bringing it all the way down and then bringing the milliseconds back up. So we want a little bit more of a tail as it opens up, but we don't want it to be that long. About 58 milliseconds should be good. And it's negative. Okay, so it's just, it's there. You could obviously adjust that to taste as well. And for the maximum values, we definitely want to adjust the cutoff amount. So let's bring that down. Alright guys, so that's basically the tutorial, and I hope you guys learned something from this. Please subscribe, like, and enjoy. Thank you guys, and see you next time.